You have a teenager in your life. Maybe you're a parent, an educator, a youth worker, or a grandparent, or aunt or uncle. Could even be the dreaded step parent, but whatever the case, you've got a kid you care about, at least most of the time. Sometimes you want to take them out in the country and drop them off where they can't find their way back home. Don't worry, that's normal. Listen, I want to help you. I've spent my life motivating teens to do stuff. I've even gotten thousands of them volunteering in foreign countries. Imagine that for a second. You can't even get them to pull the weeds. How do you get them to listen? Why did they listen when they're younger, but not now? Why did the males of the species smell so bad? Actually, we know the answer to that one. The solution, too. I'm going to give you some resources for working with a teenager in your life. At the end, by the way, I'm going to give you my personal contact info, so hang in there and you'll see it, or you could cheat and just forward to the end. You're watching this digitally. So let me start by saying this. There is no secret. There are no special words you can say to get them to do what you want, but that's okay, because that's not actually what you want anyway. Why? Well, teenagers are not machines. You can't program them to perform functions. If you could, it would be terrible, because you'd have to program them to do everything. And for some of you, the only reason your VCR isn't flashing 12 anymore is because you don't have a VCR. No matter what you do, they come partially pre-programmed. I just told you they aren't machines, thank God, but they are like a computer in one way. They have hardware, software, and firmware. The hardware is the physical stuff that can't be changed, like eye color, height, skin tones. The software is the stuff that can and will change, like skills, knowledge, attitudes. But people forget about the firmware. It's the part of the operating system that's hardwired. In teenagers, that's the personality, the talents, and the temperament that somebody has. They are who they are, and you can't and shouldn't want to change that. It's important to understand that there are things you can influence, but a lot of who they are is the way they were born. How do we know that? Because of twins. Now listen, I know a lot about twins. I'm like a twinologist. My grandmother was a twin. I have twin nephews. My brothers are twins. I even married a twin for some reason. Only about 3% of the population are twins, and only about 10% of those twins are identical. My wife, my brothers, my nephews, all identical. In other words, I am surrounded by freaks of nature. They love it when I say that. But twins help us understand something important, because when you separate them at birth to be adopted by different families, which doesn't happen anymore, but it used to, you could study how much nature determines who we are. You could take two twins who were raised in completely separate environments that share the exact same DNA and figure out how similar and different they are, okay? They got a little DNA buddy, but they're not exactly like them. Turns out they're about half like them, if we're gonna use some shorthand. Well, what does this mean? Well, for our purposes today, it means a couple of things. One is that you can only influence part of who the teenager will become, okay? And it's important to remember that. And second, you have to be careful not to try to jam a square peg into a round hole, because the teenager that you love, that maybe you even birthed, could be very, very different from you. So what is the best way to influence them for good and not for evil? Well, I'm so glad you asked. The key to influencing the teenager in your life is leaving behind the leadership style of the benevolent dictator and becoming a coach. Listen, maybe being a loving but all-powerful Lord of the Realm worked when they were younger, but not anymore. You're gonna have to adjust your strategy. And I'm not suggesting some laissez-faire, let-it-be approach to parenting. I believe in setting standards high and expectations even higher, but those expectations are high when it comes to character, not performance. So, why is coaching effective? So glad you asked. Number one is this: everyone needs an outside perspective. When it's delivered with humility that recognizes individuality, outside perspectives are life-changing. Did you know that some women see 100 times as many colors as men? That's true. Sir, there's just a difference between purple and violet. You just can't tell. LeBron James' various coaches can't drive the lane better than him. He's the best basketball player in the world, but they can see things that he can't and help him get better. That's the value of a coach in sports, and it's the value of a coach in life. Number two, everyone has gaps. Listen, no one has it all together. Everybody has gaps. Coaching is about watching the blind side, seeing what you can't see because you can't see behind your head, and helping someone improve. Ever ask yourself, why do Fortune 500 CEOs and billionaires have life coaches and business coaches? Because they want to become even more successful. Number 3, everyone needs accountability. In God we trust, all others pay cash is funny. It was less funny when the Soviet Union and the United States decided to lower their number of nuclear missiles through a treaty during the Cold War in the 1980s. That's when Ronald Reagan's policy of trust but verify came into play. We needed, as the US, to verify we weren't the only ones removing our ICBMs. Whatever isn't measured can't be improved. Because Yoda is awesome. Everyone needs someone who has more experience than we have and that can tell us, there is no try. I know, that's a terrible Yoda impersonation. Okay, so how does this coaching thing work? I want to give you some principles of coaching and how to change your strategy with your teenagers so you can really influence them, all right? First one is this. Coaching starts with caring. John Wooden, who is the most successful coach of all times, hands down, you can look it up sometime, really interesting guy. He said this, a coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment. Doesn't that sound awesome? If you have a teenager, think about the idea of being able to add some correction, some course adjustment without getting that eye roll, without getting that resentment, without getting the scoffing. Here's the deal. They have to know that you care, not just in general. Of course, you're their parent, you care, but they have to know that you care about how they feel and what's important to them in that particular situation. It's an old saying, but rules without relationship produce resentment. Of course, that's true. And here's the thing that I would tell you. Rules should be few, but they should be deeply respected, okay? Rules should be few, but when they are in place, they need to be deeply respected because you don't want rules coming between you and the teenager. You want that relationship defined by mutual respect and them knowing that you really care. Next principle is this. Coaching teaches discipline, okay? It's not about disciplining someone, it's about teaching them discipline. Listen, there's times that you're gonna have to impose punishment. That isn't coaching though, that's policing. It has to be done sometimes, but for adults and for people that are transitioning to adulthood like teenagers, that's gotta be seen as a failure of systems, okay? The idea, if you remember when you were a kid and you did something wrong and the coach punished you by making you run laps, it wasn't just a punishment, it was an opportunity for you to learn discipline when it came to your own physical body, that you could push yourself further than you thought. That's the way consequences should work with your coaching relationship. It should be a learning experience, not just punishment that is doled out to express your frustration. That's not what coaches do. I love this one, even though it sounds cliche, but coaching is more about listening than talking. And everyone says, oh, we gotta meet you where you are. Well, how do you know where someone is if you're not listening to them, if you're not asking them, if you're not watching their body language, okay? Keep in mind here, you're only trying to influence that 50% of a teenager that you can influence, but how can you even know who they are, what's baked into the cake when they were born, if you're not asking them questions? And I know sometimes, I usually say working with teenagers, the number one skill you need is being able to hold both sides of the conversations because it's so hard to get them to talk. But when you start asking them about the things they care about, things start to change. John Wooden said this, young people need models, not critics. And that is true. With teenagers, more is caught than is taught. Listen to that for a second. More is caught by them watching what you do than you'll be able to tell them to do. So be slow to speak, quick to listen, and consistent in how you act. How do you know how to act as a model? By listening to who they are and what's important to them. And then you can really get through to them. The next one is this, and I love this. Coaching is about practice. Remember, Most coaching takes place during practice, not the game. During the game, adjustments can be made during timeouts, but while the game is happening, if the coach steps on the field, she gets a penalty. In real life, the coach isn't there on the field when the game is being played. And with your teenager, the real decisions that are made that are consequential are mostly happening when you aren't present. So you have got to make the time that you are present count. Listen, all teenagers are finding out who they are, okay? They're no longer just part of a family unit, but they're trying to figure out, do they believe what you said? Is there another way that's better than what you said? And most of this happens when you're not around. That might be bittersweet, but it's true, and you know it's true. They're not different than you were when you were a kid. Practice is where they can make mistakes while the consequences are small. In the game, the consequences are bigger, and they lead to failure, okay? When you make mistakes during the game, you can discuss and correct that later during the next practice, but remember, even in that situation, don't chastise coach. You gotta set up situations where your teenagers can make mistakes around you when the stakes are low. They have to be able to make mistakes around you when those stakes are low, because that's how they learn from their mistakes. If you're waiting for a situation where the stakes are really high, that can be difficult. But even then, it's not fatal. As a matter of fact, John Wooden, our sage, said this: failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be. Another principle is this: coaching involves other coaches. A smart coach doesn't try to limit the access to other influences. He tries to engineer the right influences from the right coaches. The smartest coaches in history have still had assistant coaches. You've got to realize that your teenagers need other influences that support what you want them to know. John Wooden said this: whatever you do in life, surround yourself with smart people who will argue with you. That's huge. You aren't the North Star to your kid. You used to be. But now they're looking for other influences too. And listen, it's okay, because you can't teach them everything you know, and you don't know everything. But if you're alone in your coaching, then they will be far less than a copy of you. They'll be a bad copy of just part of you. So you have to realize that you need to get other influences in their life. I remember when I was a young youth worker, there was a 12-year-old girl whose parent came to me and says, I'm not comfortable with your influence over my daughter's life. She comes home and tells me, oh, Jeff said things that I've been telling her whole life. I think it's all out of whack. And I looked at him and I said, do you not realize that's the way things work? You should be happy that I'm still saying and repeating the same things that you're saying, and I'm backing you up. Don't be jealous. Get strategic. Tax what you don't like. Subsidize what you want to see more of, okay? Should your kids be able to go to the movies with friends that you aren't sure about? Maybe, but I wouldn't pay for that. Hanging out with that friend who has an awesome parent that can influence them and has the same values as you? Pay for that, all right? Don't get jealous, get strategic. Our last principle of how coaching works is this: coaching takes time. There are no shortcuts. John Wooden said this: if you don't have the time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? Okay, that's a great statement. And I want to tell you this: coaching is time intensive. I know we have all these ideas about quality time and quantity time. Listen, time is time, and you have to put in the time. How else are you going to listen? How else are they going to know that they care? How else are you going to help them make mistakes that are inconsequential? The only way you can do it is time. And realize that it's a long story, you with your teenager. And someday they're going to be an adult, and the coaching won't stop then. I've had this conversation a million times, but I remember almost the first time I had it, a dad I know who was very successful, and his son, who was 19, had become addicted to drugs. And I mean, he was a hardcore meth addict. I remember talking to him one night, and I looked at him and I said, hey, listen, you've got to realize something, because I saw the despair in his eyes. I said, this story isn't over. Your son isn't dead. We're still in the middle of this story. And if you keep doing what you need to do, maybe this story will have an incredible ending. that happened. That kid now has kids of his own, made that dad a grandfather, he's successful, he's married. But if that dad had given up in the middle of that story, maybe it would have ended really differently. All right, listen, I told you at the end I'd give you my contact info because you can actually text me. You can email me if you want, all right? So I'm putting it on the screen right here, but my phone number is 707-310-2665, and you can email me, jeff@studentreach.org. I respond to every single message that I get. So if you want to interact, or maybe you have some problems, or maybe there's some other way that I can help you, let me know. I'll do what I can. Also, if you want the notes to this session, which I highly suggest you get, go to studentreach.org, uCoach2, studentreach.org, uCoach2. We'll send you the notes to this session right out so that you'll have them. Hey, thanks for listening. I know that you can be more awesome. Do it.